Okay. Tripp and Shelly here, chatting about one of the easiest verses, a set of verses in the Bible about, women submitting to men and men loving their wives like Christ loved the church. So I think it's a pretty easy topic. What do you think, Shelly?
Yeah, we tend to hit the easy ones.
Yeah, right. I mean, might as well. We don't want to be arrogant and think we can answer all the problems, but the easy ones we're good at.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so I guess one of my questions for you is what is your gut reaction whenever you hear that verse? Like, what does it mean? Like, what's the takeaway that you have from that verse?
Yeah, my gut reaction has kind of changed over the years. First of all, I think growing up in the cultural South and then moving to France and then moving to West Africa and viewing marriages in all three of those contexts.
Mhm.
To where now at this point, I find it to be something that it's more of a lifestyle and an attitude to be worked out like between a man and a wife, like between them. So I'm a lot more hesitant to draw like hard and fast lines.
Yeah. I mean, so, I know, especially in America, and, the wives should submit to their husbands is like kind of like a visceral reaction. You can almost like feel the tension whenever that verse is brought up. And so we were talking about before, from my perspective, we can go one of two ways with this, and I think, or we can go three ways. But there, on the one hand, on one end of the pendulum, we can say, well, that was just a product of the time, and it doesn't mean anything. And the other hand, we can read it and say, oh no, it means exactly what you think it means. And I think that we I feel like we're all kind of pulled to choose one of those two binaries, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's an unacceptable position. We can't say that that my gut visceral reaction upon reading that verse means that I understand it fully, what it means to do that, because there's a lot of things I don't understand, and it also was written 2,000 years ago, and there's a whole cultural context around it. That's kind of like, okay, fine. On the other hand, we can't say, okay, well, because there's a cultural context in which this was written and that kind of thing, therefore I can just ignore it, right? It doesn't mean anything at all. And so both of those, I think, are non-starters, at least for me. But you can almost feel it, right? Whenever you like, oh yeah, like, love your wife like Christ loved the church sounds really nice, right? That one, everyone. Okay, I'll say this. That one everyone is way too comfortable with from my perspective. And I think that like everyone's like, oh, that sound, whatever. Like no one really understands what that means, or we like just kind of ignore what actually is being men are being called to there. And so we all kind of like, yeah, sure, of course, like love your life like Christ loved the church, because be like Jesus, that's fine.
Yeah.
But the wives submit to your husbands is the one that we all just like cringe about.
Yeah.
And so, from your perspective, do you feel that? Does a part of you kind of like not
Yeah,
like is it the language, or like what
the
is it
language.
that you don't
It's the
like?
language.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I do in West Africa. It's part of my job is picking words for the Bible translation.
Okay.
Going around, I'm not the exegete. I don't know the original languages, but part of my job is testing the language with the community.
Mm.
So then when you come back and you realize that we're using this word, but the picture we want the people to have in their head of when we use this word, they are not picturing that. They're picturing something different. And I really believe that like when men and women say this word submission, they're like two different pictures in their heads.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I feel
or
like
actually, I don't even know if that's true. I do know that like the picture that I think that gets into people's head isn't what I think is being described in the scripture.
Scripture.
But sometimes I think that guys kind of do get that picture in
Maybe,
their
I don't
head.
know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but
Yeah, well, I think the most productive way to have the conversation, like if you're dating someone or you're married to someone, would really be to start out with like, so what do you picture when this word submission is used? And kind of take it from there, because I don't know, I guess I'm making the assumption, but I do think that more often than not, the woman will probably describe something, the man's like, no, that's not at all what I mean.
mm,
And you could skip some of this miscommunication from the get-go.
yeah.
Um, I kind of
So
liken it.
so what do you think? What do you think of women, like? How would like if you had to guess what the average even Christian woman would describe submission looking like? What would that be? Like what in your experience, what comes to mind?
I mean, I think it's really, really dependent on upbringing and your parentage and your grandparents and what males you had in your life. I have a great dad, but still the picture of him like a man saying like submit in my head, like I don't even know where I got this, but it's like a guy in a wife beater in a trailer with a beer. Like I don't know where I even like got that, but that's what comes to mind. And like I can't help it. Like that's what comes to mind when the submission thing. But that doesn't mean I'm anti-submission. It just means that I recognize that there's a problem with the language and there's a problem with the way we talk about it sometimes.
Yeah. What do you think that the right, if we could come up with a better term that would promote a better image, what would that look like to you?
I mean, I don't know. Well, it's just thinking about the other ways we use the word submit. Like I submit a paper to be graded. Other places in the Bible we use it. Slaves, submit to your masters. Don't we talk about submit to one another in love?
Yeah.
Like not even men and women, just like Christian
Yep.
community. I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about this when you said you wanted to chat about it, like the ways we use the word submit. And maybe it's not that we need to change the word, it's just that we need to do a lot more nuanced, deep conversation about it. And part of my thing is, I don't know how helpful it is to have the conversations outside a couple. Like, I'm not sure. Do you think, I mean, you've grown up in the church, you've heard like pastors talk about it.
Yeah, but it's so shallow. It's like it's very, it's very superficial, right? And it kind of it almost encourages just kind of like the first thing that comes into your mind whenever we do it. I think that you could have better conversations around it. But one of the things that I think, from my perspective, what we need to do is, I always say this to people that, like, I have my political beliefs just like everyone else. Okay. But if I think that Jesus would be 100% in line with all of my political beliefs, right? Like all the things that I believe, and he would come here, pat me on the back, and be like, "Yeah, you're on the right team," or whatever it is. If I think that, then I'm not. I don't know what Bible you're reading, actually. Like Jesus should make you very uncomfortable in what he's calling you to do. And so I think that what we do with things like this is that we go overboard on either watering down and trying to take away the discomfort of what it is that you're being called to do,
Mhm.
or we just say you're wrong for being uncomfortable with this, right? And neither is true. Like Jesus, like some people were called to death, right, for following Jesus.
Yeah.
No one is saying that they should be comfortable with that.
Mhm.
No one is saying that, like, that is, but like you're called to do things that are uncomfortable, that are scary, that are, and so I don't want to water. I guess that's my thing with the submission, is that sometimes I think that we try to water it down and be like, oh, it doesn't mean what you think it means. It means something
Right.
like way different. That's
No,
way easier.
that's not my
And I'm like,
stance. That's not
I
my
know, I
stance.
know that's not your stance. It's just that's
It
where
happens.
I agree. I don't think it's the greatest word, and I don't have a great word for it, because there's so many ways that we use the term submit. that we equivocate and we invite imagination and that kind of stuff. At the same time, um, if you're totally comfortable with what Jesus is calling you to do, then you're not paying attention to what Jesus is calling you to do.
Mhm.
And same thing, and this is I alluded to this earlier. It's the same thing with saying like you love your wife like Christ loved the church. That should make you deeply uncomfortable as a
There was a lot.
husband.
It's a very
Like,
sacrificial love.
seriously, and even when you're being rejected, and even when you're like not being submitted to, or unfairly criticized, or unfairly treated, or whatever it is that in a marriage that you might have insecurities about, and that kind of thing, like you're called to sacrifice yourself for this other person, even though they're doing all of these things. That's what that means. That should be super scary, right? That should be like, that's the standard that I'm called to. That's terrifying. I don't want to do that. And if you think that you do want to do that, then you don't understand what it means. And so like I think that the mirror image of that is the submission, where you're called to do something, and yeah, it might be really painful to do it. And so what I don't like sometimes is I feel like we in our eagerness to get people to wrap their head around these concepts, we water them down, and we make what we're actually called to be. And this is a broader problem. We make what it means to be a Christian to seem way easier than it actually is.
Agree. Agree. I mean, that's where I was thinking about it this morning before we talked, and it's like my stance on submission at this point is like, I believe, help my unbelief. Basically, like
Yes, I love that. It's one of my favorite verses. I believe, help my unbelief. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, because it's a faith thing. I remember I was pretty like confused, frustrated, irritated about this whole topic 2 or 3 years ago when I came home. And I got home, and it was like graduation Sunday at church. These issues kind of overlap, and so it's not exactly the same issue, but it kind of is. These like 4 18-year-old boys were the pastors at church. Like it was graduation Sunday, so they got to preach. And I'm just sitting in the church, and I'm like, so these like 18-year-old kids can preach, but I, who you sent over to Africa to preach to people, cannot preach. And like, I don't even want to preach. It was like a pride issue. I know that. But I talked to my pastor later about it, and I don't know. I feel like he didn't give me an awesome answer. He was just like, I think that you'll never get to heaven and God will say that you submitted too much. And I was like, well, I don't know about that. But
I also wonder whether or not 18-year-olds should be preaching, but that's a whole different, whatever.
yeah.
But yeah, well, I think that's yeah, no, I think that is part of the struggle, right? Is that a lot of times we're called to do something that ostensibly doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Why can, like, some women do have the gift of teaching, right? And why is it that I'm called to this role versus that role, or whatever? And the only thing I can say is I don't know, looked at, like, if we look at Jesus being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, and like asked the Father to be relieved of like the burden that was placed on him, but also submitted. And so it wasn't like and that's where the complementarian be like, listen, this is not like a better, worse, or anything else. It's just like the role that you were called to play in God's orchestra in a way, and that's what you're doing. But honestly, like, no matter what role you're called to play, it's painful to do if you're really doing it. And that's where I feel like we overemphasize the submission thing, I think, and then we underemphasize the male side and the male calling in that relationship. And I agree, like, what that looks like in the relationship is very individual. It's not like universal thing of what this looks like. But to me, it seems like we by doing that, then we try and water down what the roles mean, and we make them so that they don't mean anything at all. And so then we end up like just eliminating the categories, which isn't helpful. Um, and we don't learn, because actually in fulfilling like unique hard roles, we learn. That's part of how we get sanctified, I feel like. And so I feel like sometimes God's just like setting up like, okay, I'm gonna put you in this place, and it's for your own sake, even though it's not gonna feel good, you know. So, but I know, I guess for women especially, like the submission, especially because men are like physically bigger and that kind of stuff, like that can be a scary thing. And so I was wondering what you thought about that. Like, is that playing a role, obviously, that you need to trust this person?
Yeah.
um
Yeah. And I mean, I think, as you know, we talked a little bit about on Discord about this, as women have had like less of a need for men as far as economic independence. Um, that's like a loosening factor of marriage in general. But then also the physical aspect, and just I think so I mean, I work and live on a team in West Africa, so I'm not married, but I'm still part of a team, and I have to depend on these people. We have to make decisions together. And I mean, for me, this is like, we could easily just boil this issue down to decision making. So again, like, you know, couples who have different bank accounts and are doing lives differently, like they're already like not making these decisions together. But
right.
if you are going to marry someone, then you really just need to know what their decision making grid looks like. And I guess what scares me about it is, like, I've been making my own decisions for a long time. If I did the submission thing as I understand it, you know, that's not going to be I'm not going to get to do that anymore.
What does making decisions look like to you? Like just having veto, like I can make it and I have no, I guess that's that when people say that, like, I'm not going to be able to make my own decision. It's just like having no one else to
No,
answer to,
no,
or
that's not. I like, Tim Keller talks about this. He's like, ultimately at the end of the day, like, you want to do A and I want to do B. At some point, one of them
yeah,
has to prevail. And so I guess where I am would be like, I mean, the guy at the end of the day, I guess he's going to get final, but there's going to be a lot of discussion before that point. So no, I don't mean hand everything over. I just mean, I mean, one of you you have to choose at the end of the day. Somebody has
yeah.
to. So I
I
guess that's,
think I think the thing that, like, if you take the submission and then the, love your wife like,
yeah,
like the Christ-like love, then it fits together really nicely, right? Because
right.
you like, the one person is trying to sacrifice their own desires and that kind of stuff for the other person, and the other person is submitting and trusting that person, that that's what's being done. um the hard part about it is that that's not always the case, right? Is that,
Mhm.
sometimes one person is untrusting and not submitting, and even though the other person is trying to be sacrificial, and sometimes the other person is not trying to be sacrificial, and the other person is thinking, oh, should I really submit to this jerk, right? And
Right.
so it becomes transactional, which is the thing that I find really the hardest thing, is that it can feel very transactional, where, well, why should I sacrifice for my wife if she doesn't really, fulfill her role? And she's like, well, why should I submit to this guy if he's not sacrificing to me? And so it becomes like, which is, I think that's the problem with the way we talk about it, is that, yes, even still you should sacrifice for, you should like, each person should fulfill their role, even if the other person isn't fulfilling theirs. And that's where it becomes hard and scary for people, right? And I don't think that men understand what that one side looks like of the self-sacrificial. But I think that women, I think on the other end, women understand what it means to submit to a jerk, and that's why it scares them. Um,
Right.
and
I mean,
I totally get that.
especially if you're like a Christian woman who like takes marriage seriously.
Yeah.
Like your husband starts to be a jerk and you have no respect for marriage, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Or, there's kids involved now.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but no, I think we're on the same page. I mean, I think you're right. Like sacrifice compels submission. See Jesus.
Yeah.
The thing is when you're dating someone, you know, like, hey, we're gonna go to
That's
a
a good
movie, we're gonna
point.
go hiking this weekend. Like you don't see the decision-making grid in process. So it's a little bit
I guess
harder.
that's a good point. I never really thought about what is to you, like what does in dating, what is submission, like what role does submission really play? Because obviously the submission is it's wives submit to your husbands, right? So we have this in between stage where you might not even be engaged or you're dating and that kind of stuff, but to what degree should that still reflect a marriage, right? Because I mean
Right.
you are so like I just how do you think about that? What I mean, or how do women, I guess, generally think about that?
Um, yeah, I don't know because I think on both sides, it's kind of like I don't know, you're trying to see how the other person makes decisions and like what voices are they listening to, what's influencing how they make decisions. It doesn't scare me to marry someone who doesn't always make the right decision because I don't always make the right decision either. It scares me to marry someone who can't admit when they've made the wrong decision.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably more important for a woman because again, if you are following the submission model, you kind of need that.
Yeah.
So
How does it enter in when it's not like a stubbornness of not admitting the right decision? Because I guess it starts to get complicated, right? Because you may think that your husband made the wrong decision and that kind of stuff, and he can't admit it, right? And you may be right, you may be wrong.
right.
um, and even if you are right, it may not be like a stubbornness thing on him. It may be he's blind to something, right? And so it's not necessarily like a heart issue, it's more like a sight issue. um, and which maybe they're related, but I do think it's differently when someone is clearly doing something wrong that they're refusing to admit versus like they don't really understand what they are
Mhm.
doing and they're doing something wrong. Like how would you navigate like that? um like what, I guess, you're trying to figure out how they make decisions, but often your judgments on whether or not they made their decisions, like that's also subject to your own sin and your own
That's
information and
true.
all that kind of stuff.
I don't sin, Trip. So
Oh, I guess, oh, that's
uh,
good. I'm talking to the right person then.
yeah. Um, I don't know. It's kind of like a wife question, and I'm not a wife, but even like in a girl,
Well,
I don't
but
know.
that's what you're trying to evaluate, right? Is like how do
Yeah,
they make decisions and that kind of stuff. So
because I think once you're married, it's like okay, they made a wrong decision, but now it's like my submission is not. It's like the respect is no longer. The respect should be earned, but like I don't give respect based on um, what they've done. You give respect because like God's law, and like you respect God, thus you respect your husband even when he's acting like a jerk.
yeah.
Um, the dating part, I know that's a good question. I don't know. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, I have two sons, and but like, if I had a daughter, like, what would I tell her, once she started dating about like the relationship she should have? Like, obviously, he should respect you, and whatever, and okay, fine. But that's what he should do to you. What should you do to him is a question that I don't really know. Like, and that's another like kind of asymmetry I find in the conversation because
it's true.
it's easy to tell a guy, listen, your girlfriend, treat her like Christ treated the church. Sure. Right. It's kind of like a
Yeah,
generic thing that you can always like tell a guy and how he should treat a girl. Okay, fine. But the other way around, it's not quite symmetrical, right? And so that's the part that also I feel like encourages the transactional nature of how we look at this, because it seems conditional, right? At least like it could seem conditional, and that's where it's a little bit strange to me, and I'm not even sure how to quite navigate it.
I know, I agree. I remember reading this blog thing that was for guys, but I was like curious, so I was reading it. And it was like
You hang out on Discord, so clearly you like
that's
that. Yeah.
true. That's true. Um, and it was like, so you should, when you're dating a girl, purposely tell her no about things. Maybe she wants to go to this restaurant and you just tell her
Is it
no.
like a
It's like
men's
test
rights
her.
activist or
I
something?
don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah, it was like test her, see how she responds to her will being thwarted. And I was like, I feel like that's a terrible idea. I mean,
In
I
general, testing the other person is just a bad idea. That's not,
don't know.
yeah.
But no, I think that is a good question about how a woman's supposed to do that. Like, how is that's supposed to be modeled before marriage,
Mhm. Well, I mean, and how is a guy supposed to make a decision,
right?
right? In some ways, like, if it seems, again, it just seems asymmetrical, and I don't know what advice to give people, but it does seem like we over index on how hard and submission is, and women are not called to do it except in a marriage. On the other end, we kind of say, well, but treating her like Christ loved treated the church, that's easy, and like, don't worry about that, that's nice, and do that all the time, by the way.
Right.
And that's where you're like, but I don't know, like that seems it, the other side is hard, and I think we were not understanding what exactly we're being called to, and we're way too flippant about it. And yeah.
I had an analogy. I forgot to make it earlier. My sister brought it up this morning. I was like, oh, that's good. Because I was telling her I was going to talk to you. Um, she said, just this submission word, as we were talking about, it's a very hot button word. And she's like, I can only liken it to maybe you're dating a girl, you're a guy, and you're dating a girl who says, I just want to marry someone who's going to take care of me. On like date number one or date number two. Like,
Mhm.
are there alarm bells ringing in your head right now?
Yeah.
Um, even if you know, maybe like even if you know her and you know she just means she just wants to have kids and she wants to be some like it's not a
Right.
bad thing, but like there are alarm bells ringing in your head. I that's how I would compare it to I'm a
Yeah,
complementarian.
because there's
I'm
all
looking
kinds
for
of, yeah, exactly. No, I think that's a good analogy, because there's all kinds of like imagined things that could go along with that just take care of me
yeah.
thing, that would make you wonder, like, am I really going to be able to take care of you in the way that you're imagining that I am? Is this a transactional
You're
relationship?
thinking of like closets full of shoes and she's just thinking of I want to stay home with my kids.
Right, and I get that, and depending on the girl, it may scare me more or less, whether or not I heard that from her. But yeah, because you can have all these imagined things about what that means coming from the other person, and not just I just want to be take care of them. Like, forget just the money and shoes and that kind of stuff. Just like, you expected to be constantly doted upon. Um,
Hmm.
right, like just like constantly paid attention to and that kind of stuff. Like, is that going to be like the nature of our relationship? And you sit down in a hammock and I'm just like waving a palm branch, and I go
And
like,
like,
is that what it is? I don't know, like, I mean, for some people, for sure.
well, and that's ironically that palm branch hammock scenario could be done on the submission imagination in women's heads too.
100%,
So,
100% is that, like, I have no responsibilities, you just need to do what I say, right? And so I think it's probably a similar fear,
mhm.
that it's all about you, and it's not like me is not part of this. I become a subordinate member of this, right? Of this relationship, as opposed to one flesh. And so I think so it makes sense to me why it would be scary, especially, I mean, especially again, like, given the like physical differences and all this kind of things. And especially like you throw in children, right? Because, then you have children, and the economic consequences of that, and now you're more dependent on the guy and that kind of stuff. So then the idea of submission becomes like harder, right? Even still, because now it's not like I can just get up and necessarily leave, although the economics are changing, so that's becoming more possible, but it's still like scary. So I get it. I just think that I just feel like when we talk about it, we're just like, oh, it doesn't mean what you think it means. It means something else. And you're like, no, it actually kind of does mean, like, in some ways, what you think it means and what you're scared that it means. Um, my point is usually just like, you should be really scared about what you're being told to do too. Like that should scare the shit out of you. And if it doesn't, then you don't get it. And I feel like we focus so much on, yeah, wives be submissive, and we don't focus as much on the guy's part in it. Or we trivialize it as if that doesn't mean, as if it means it's just like, oh, you just need to be nice to your wife or
Right.
something. And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, no, 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 that's self-sacrificial. That's like, you know, being Christ mean like he went to the cross for you. That's what happened. That was painful. That stressed him out. He was being rejected all along the way, even though he had the best of intentions and loved the people that he was doing and that kind of stuff. That's what you're called to. So if anything, like that should be just as scary to us as the idea of of submitting to someone who's a tyrant. That is scary. But the other side's really scary too, right?
Yeah. Being married to a shrew.
Yeah, well, not even like a shrew or someone like is like trying to do it, but like we all bring like insecurities to a marriage that will never be fulfilled by the other person. And so, but you're called to, even though you're going to be sinned against, and even though like that person's never going to fill some of those things, um, they weren't really meant to, but B, like you're called to be sacrificial even in the face of that. And that should really scare you, because that does look like submission, but it's submission to God.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it's submission both ways around it. And I think that we lose that picture because we just think, oh, just be super nice. And you're like, listen, Jesus wasn't super nice. That's not how we should describe him. That's like, I hate that picture of him. Jesus was harsh, and he was, a lot of things, and he was self-sacrificial and took on an ultimate pain, like sweating blood pain for us. That's what you're called to do as a husband.
And then
Okay.
that makes, yeah, submission much easier.
Right. And then the problem is that then sin enters the equation on both sides, and it becomes transactional, where you'll submit if I do this, but if I'm doing this and you're not submitting, then all of a sudden I'm going to be pissed off, and I'll be like, well, screw this. I don't want to be self-sacrificial. But even when, like, you're called on both sides to do it. And so, like, I actually think that women should be scared of the submission calling. And we shouldn't downplay it. I think that it is something super serious. I think that we should be playing up the other side of the equation and be like, guys, you're not scared enough about what it is that you're being called to. And anyway, that's just kind of what I'm thinking about with this, and why I think it's an interesting conversation. And what do you tell people, like, before they get married? I mean, once people are married,
Right.
it's a different conversation. But before they
Yeah.
get married, like, what would you tell your kids?
It's awkward.
Yeah, like, what would you tell? I mean, I don't know. Like, what am I going to tell my boys? I don't. Uh, yeah,
Well,
you're
like you said, I feel like it is more straightforward for like telling boys and telling young men, like you're a protector, you're a provider, da da da. For girls, um, walking that line of like submissive and um, doormat is a lot. I feel like it's harder. Um,
See, the only reason I think it is easier to tell guys, but it's because we're not telling guys the truth. That's why I think it's easier. Um, I think that we're telling boys, like, yes, do this, and whatever. but we're not really being honest with them about what that entails. And so it's almost like it, you almost so that's what I'm saying is like, should we scare guys more? Like, is that a good thing? I don't know. But at some point, I don't think that we're setting guys up for success either in dating or being engaged or being married, because we're not being honest about what it is that they're called to do. We can trivialize it, and I
Right.
don't
That
think
makes
I don't.
sense. Well, it reminds me of the conversation that's been had on Discord, and PBK's talked about how like the evangelical community is losing men because there is no, like, men have to have something to step up to in order to step up. And so there's no like work involved in like, not, I mean, I'm making a generalization, but there's less work involved in like to enter an evangelical church.
Yeah.
You're in, and your spiritual growth is kind of on you now. Whereas, you know, the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, there's a little bit more stuff on the front end to go through.
There's hurdles. Yeah, there's hurdles in your way that you have to clear before you can like achieve the status, right?
So, I mean, yeah, same. You can take that application and move it to marriage, I guess, in that sense. Like, give the challenge, and they'll probably accept the challenge. But if the challenge isn't there, they're not going to take it on.
Right. Or they're going to think that there's something wrong whenever they get into the marriage. Like, the challenge is going to show up, right? There's no two ways around that. And so what they're going to do is I feel like often they're going to get into the marriage and just feel like there's something wrong with the marriage, right? There's something wrong with this girl or whatever. And then they become little tyrants because they had bad expectations, and they just think, oh, a different marriage, a different girl or whatever is going to make me happy. And then I won't feel this way, or I won't do it. But yeah, I think guys would step up if we talk to them about that. I don't know necessarily that, depending on how you did it, we don't want to scare guys away from marriage or anything, but
Right.
because they need it. But I don't think we're doing the women any favors or the guys any favors by pretending it's going to be easier than it is. And I think that we, like, I guess, and I think that we overemphasize one part of the equation. And we should emphasize just how hard it is to pick up your cross in this way in a marriage, for guys. And that's not to give them excuses, that's to sober them up, right? And to go in with their eyes wide open, so that like when it happens, it's not like a blindsiding just disillusionment, where they just kind of check out because now it's not my responsibility to keep going with this. And I also don't think that we do women any favors by telling them that submission means something less than what it does either.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I feel like we've ragged on guys a lot. I'll do a little thing.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just feel like, I think some things that women find confusing in American context is, we've grown up, especially less me. I feel like maybe it just depends on your parents. But you grow up with this, you can get any job you want. You can be the same as boys. It's all about, be smart, be brave. It's not about gender. And then actually in this regard, it is. It's completely gender-based roles. Right. And so to like flip mindsets, where at the workplace, I expect to be treated equally as my male colleague. And then I get home and things are not equal. They're different.
Yeah.
They're not the same. I think that's hard, and that has to be addressed in some way too.
Yeah.
And I'll admit to some confusion. I've been doing, following Jordan Peterson. He talks about contending with your spouse. And sometimes I'm like, okay, so, well, first of all, I will just acknowledge, as we both know, that Jordan Peterson is in fact not a preacher preaching the word of God.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of his precepts, I'm in line with. But this whole like contending thing, I'm like, okay, so I can contend with my husband, but I'm also submitting. Like how is it a real contention if I know I'm going to lose at the end?
Yeah.
Which goes back to like I'll take the Bible over Jordan Peterson as wise as I do think he is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's an interesting point. I think it's interesting though, because even in a situation where there's a clear, like, proper, like, relationship and orientation toward the two people, we sometimes do find in the Bible things that kind of reverse that and aren't necessarily punished. Um, so, like, Jacob was renamed Israel as he who contends with God, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, not obviously husband and wife are not God creature, but it is, like, obviously there's a proper orientation for these two, right? And in the same way for a husband and a wife. And so it is interesting that Jacob wrestled with, or he who wrestled with God, I think is the exact is the translation. Like, he wrestled, like, it kind of like fought God or something, and like demanded to be blessed or whatever. Um, and so I do think it's interesting that I don't necessarily hate the term contend, because Abraham negotiated with God about Sodom and that kind of stuff. And so I do think that there's sometimes there can be, like, a proper contending with the thing that's ultimately going to contending with the thing that whose, like, decision is properly resting with, um, for your own in your own interests and concerns and that kind of stuff. So I don't necessarily hate that term of contending with your spouse, because we are contending in various ways, like, based on our backgrounds and that kind of stuff. We're going to have, Sarah mentioned this in the emotional manipulation conversation that we had, that, like, sometimes it's just like their values, like their value hierarchy is slightly different than yours, and so, like, we're contending with each other about which is the proper one to apply in this situation. So I don't hate that. I think there's a way of contending, and even with my kids, right? Like, my kid, I don't actually, like, I don't want my kid to talk. There's a way of talking back and arguing with me that my 4-year-old will do that's not okay. There's another way of them, like, contending with me that is actually probably okay. And like, so it's one of those things where just because one person needs to have kind of the general posture of submission doesn't mean that contention is necessarily wrong. I don't think. I think a lot of times it's the motivation, right? Like, what are you,
Yeah.
like? Are you trying to contend with me, like, out of rebellion?
Contentious wife is in fact a bad thing.
Yes, exactly. And so, like, are you doing it out of a motivation to not submit, or are you doing it out of a motivation to, like, let me know of something that you care about that I'm not taking into consideration whenever when I'm trying to figure out what I think is the right thing to do? And those are very different, obviously. um, in the same way that a husband not knowing what his wife needs, and making a decision that harms her is very different than him knowing what a wife needs and making a decision that harms her. And so I think sometimes it's just the motivation. I feel like I don't have a problem with Jordan Peterson saying contending, um, but contentious, yeah, that's not a good thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what you said, I mean, grace plays such a huge role too. Like, when I get married, I know that my husband won't love me like Christ loved the church all the time. And I'm going in with that expectation. And it would be nice if he would go in with the expectation that I won't get the submission thing right all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, doesn't mean, yeah, grace. It's part of the package.
Right. And if you both, like, have that, if you both have that attitude that, like, I know she's not going to always, you know, be, like, the wife that she should be, and I'm not going to be the kind of husband. I need to have grace for that, and I still need to try and fulfill my side of the bargain, not as a response. This is where I think people get
Yeah.
it really wrong, and I get it wrong sometimes, or a lot of times, or all the time. is that I feel like my part of the bargain is only applicable so long as the other person is holding up their end of it. And so then it becomes like I'll be Christ-like if you do this. And so if you both come in with the grace that the other person won't get it right all the time, and yet you are still called to this, even when they don't repeatedly, you're still called to this, then I think that's the proper thing, which is why it should scare everyone, right? Because
Right.
like that's going to be hard, like both sides, that's going to be really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're right. Like, scare everyone, make everyone reverent. How's about we say that?
Yes,
Like,
yes, I
not
think that's
scare
right.
people away, just like respectful and reverent of this situation.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's kind of like, in the Old Testament, the priest that would, once a year on Day of Atonement would go into the Holy of Holies, right? And they would put like bells around like the robe so that the people outside of the Holy of Holies, outside the curtain, could hear them walking around, and would actually have a rope tied to the guy's foot in case God struck them dead, right? And it's that kind of reverence that I think that we're missing here, where we just take it way too lightly, and we don't understand what we're walking into, right? And so the bells, were that in some ways they were, to let the people outside know, is this guy still moving? Did God strike him dead? But then sometimes it also serves as a reminder to them and to the person walking in, to the high priest, that like, this is a really serious thing that you're walking into. This is not something to be taken lightly. This is something that's really, really important. And you have responsibilities, and God's going to hold you accountable for your responsibilities. And there's judgment on the other end of this. And I think that's a missing message in the Christian church when it comes to marriage. We trivialize it by just talking about, okay, don't have sex before marriage or whatever. Like, there's a couple rules that we're really judgmental about, but then like after that, we're just kind of like, like, it's fine, just don't do that, and you're good. And wives, submit, obviously, and be like Jesus. And we just kind of like really trivialize it, and you're like, no, this is, man, I promise you, trying to like love your wife like Christ loved the church is harder than not having sex before marriage, by a long shot. And yet we're so preoccupied with the latter, and we don't talk about the former, or we talk about it way too lightly.
Right. Well, and the former lasts a lot longer too.
It does. It's
Hopefully.
forever. Right. Hopefully. Yeah. I mean, it lasts forever, and that's so, yeah. So I guess, how would you talk about it to like if you had like high school girls or college age girls and that kind of stuff, like how would you talk about submission to them in a way that, like, what is there another word or set of words or caveats that you would put around it to not trivialize it, but also not conjure up some of the things that.
Well, first of all, I'd probably go, especially with high school and college girls, but anyone. We talked about this a little bit in our direct messaging at one point. Just the selection process. If you pick a right caliber of man, like, submission will be easier anyway. So I go with that first, like, be a lot more picky, be a lot more choosy. And that's like giving you a head start to begin with. And then, yeah, I'm still a little stuck on this. How do you model submission outside of a marriage?
Right.
In a non-weird way. Like, you could be a weird girl and like wherever you want to go all the time, like while you're dating, and you could do that. And I don't know. I'm not a guy. Maybe that's good, but
I don't think that's what guys want. Like,
it's kind of
generally,
weird. I don't know.
that's not
like,
even. Yeah.
If you want to marry a robot, like, I think that's a thing now. You can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know.
And that is the thing. And so this is something I talked about a little bit in the emotional manipulation. It might have been after we stopped recording, but
I just watched that.
Oh, good. I hope it was. I hope I ramble. And so, like, one thing about me is that I am a physical affection person with people I'm close with, right? And so with people I'm not close with, like I don't like massages because I don't like to be touched. I don't like crowds. I want space and that kind of stuff because it's actually a very intimate thing for me. And so, with people I'm close with though, I am a physical affection person. Um, my wife is very much not a physical affection person, and it hurts my feelings sometimes. And so what I find is that, like if I ask her, like, will you hold my hand, and then she does, it doesn't mean as much as if she just grabs my hand, right? Knowing that because I know she doesn't like really care about this, or it doesn't like mean as much to her, but I know that then she's thinking about me and she cares about me and she's doing it. So you don't want a robot to just do whatever you ask when you ask it, because what it means is that that person is not, they're not like free to respond or not respond to you in love. And so when they do respond, even if it's 100% of the time, it doesn't mean anything to you. So like, I don't think guys want that, or if they think they want it, I don't think that's really what they want, is a girl to just go along with whatever it is that they. So I certainly wouldn't advise that, not for the guy or the girl, that's not a good attitude to have. I don't even know what the biblical mandate is on modeling submission before marriage, right? Like what, like how
Where's
do you
that
do
chapter
that?
about dating?
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, there's chapters on arranged marriages, but not so much dating, which probably why we're missing them. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to model that. But in other ways, you would say, yes, you want to model some of the behaviors that you're going to have in marriage when you're dating, and do it honestly so that everyone knows what they're getting into. But you know, like with submission, it's hard. How do you at what point do you start submitting to the person that you're
Yeah,
dating, right? Like
exactly.
certainly when you become like a fiance, I would say like, yeah, you really need to start modeling that and see how it works out. But like first date, second date, fifth date, I don't like.
Yeah. And I don't actually even blame guys for being like, I feel like guys put out feelers to me way too early, but I understand. Like I'm all about like realistic expectations and like knowing what you're getting into. I get that, but it's hard. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Well, yeah, and also like, as you know, guys get led on a lot too, and so you have kind of like this fear that am I just like am I wasting my time with the, like even Christian guys, like I don't like a Christian guy is like, yeah, I keep uh, I I know some guys that I know are getting just kind of fleeced by girls, like just getting free dinners and that kind of thing, and those kind of, and so like they're just being taken advantage of, and the girl has no intention really of, and so I get why guys want to like, they feel like they need to like, I need to test the waters now, like what,
investigate, right?
yeah, what kind of girl is this, is she serious, and that kind of stuff. I get it. It's probably not productive, but I get why they do it, because I mean, guys are as scared as girls are, just like in different ways. And so like guys are worried about, yeah, just wasting my time and being constant friend zone guy. I don't know. I see guys like that. I'm like, dude, she's just not that into you. Just like find someone else. It's fine.
I mean, I guess it kind of brings me back to like what kind of person you're dating. If you're scared to have this conversation, then maybe
Mhm.
that's a bad sign. But I don't, and I don't know how early you need to have it, but maybe
Yeah,
just
you don't want to like order the appetizers and be
right.
like, what do you think about submission, huh?
I was on a don't laugh trip. I was on a dating site for missionaries. Not a missionary.
I'm amazed that that actually exists.
Yes.
That's all.
And logistically, it makes sense. Like,
It does make sense. It makes total sense. But it's just amazing to me that there's like this whole niche like of the internet that
the
I can
internet.
be completely unaware of.
Um, well, anyway, we don't have to talk about this side.
Because I mean, it makes sense. Like if like you want to regularly go back to some mission field or something like that as part of like your life, and you do still want to get married,
Right.
like it's going to be really important to find someone who doesn't want to have the white picket fence in, you know,
Yeah.
in Kansas, right?
Yeah.
But
So on this site anyway, we don't there'll be guys who it's like, you know, you have like, I don't know, 3 lines or something to like talk about yourself as like a teaser or whatever. I don't know, like a
yeah,
little summary of yourself. And they'll be like, it's really important that you know that I'm a complementarian. And I'm like,
yeah,
in the 3
too
lines, I need to know that.
too soon, bro. Yeah, too soon. Yeah,
And
exactly.
again, at one point I do get it. Again, expectations. But like, really, I don't need to know that you're funny or like that. I don't know. It's just, it's hard. It's hard. I get it. It's hard for guys. It's hard for girls. And I don't know how many ways there are that it's not going to be awkward, but
I think I think that that's also, it's not even just the complementarian thing. It's more like I'm I'm putting up front, um how to say it. I think it's really off-putting to put up front criteria on the other person as to whether or not they would be um, like obligations that we're putting up front on the other person. And so like it would be, and that could be more than just the complementarian submission thing. Some of them I think are fair and don't really scare people off. Like I think that, oh yeah, I want to marry a Christian, right? I don't think that most people, like, that doesn't strike them that way. But like, you know, I want a guy with a six pack or something like that.
right.
Like it's very off putting to be like, oh, like you're because again, like this is like, yeah, it's just you're putting upfront obligations and expectations on the other person, and what you mean by complementarian may not mean what I think it means, and so, but you're kind of like, just the way that that would come across is just so, yeah, I agree, that's like distasteful. I don't understand.
Well, and also, Sarah said this in y'all's video. Like, I mean, the ideal picture of love is the wife taking care of the husband's needs and the husband taking care of the wife's needs. So neither of them are actually striving for their own needs, but their needs are being
Yeah,
met. And I understand, like, we live in a fallen world and that doesn't happen. But the way the heart rolls work, as you said, like, males need respect and women need to be loved and sacrificed for. Like, it just works.
yeah,
But yeah, I understand why men need feel like we need to verbalize it on the front end, but like if you think about the gospel and the way we're supposed to love each other, we're supposed to be doing it anyway.
right, yeah, totally.
I think
And then also like it's, again, I'll go back to that, like which side of that equation is the guy thinking about whenever he writes it, right? Is it his side of what being like a complementarian actually would be? Like, is that what you're advertising, that this is the kind of like mutual, like self-sacrificial relationship that you're looking for? Or is it just you, are you trying to say you just want a girl who's going to do what you tell her to do, and it's really important that you like that that's the case, and whatever. So like it's just, yeah, it's not a, and also like just boiling everything down to a single term like complementarian is just like, it's not helpful. Like we all have different ideas for what that means.
that even means right.
Yeah, and also, even if we didn't have different ideas or definitions for what it means as applied to two individuals is also important, right? Like there's nothing not complementarian around a, a wife handling the family finances, for instance. Like there's nothing not complementarian about that. That's completely compatible, and that is fine. If you guys, if it's like a mutual agreement that this is like a better use of her talents and interests and that kind of stuff, like that can be totally complementarian. Um, and so what it actually means for a complementarian marriage to work itself out is like, it's so unique to each couple that like just saying up front, well, I'm a complementarian. They're like, well, you don't even know me. How do you, like, what are you talking about? Like, what would that look like for us? It's not a useful thing to throw out there at all.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's um, the only other thing that I would say that, you know, I do try to spend most of my time bashing the guy side, um, but the only other thing that I would say that go back to your earlier point of like women are expected to essentially be genderless in a lot of aspects of their lives, and then or Christian or in marriage it becomes like gendered. I do wonder like whether or not that does worry me, because I don't think that that's true. That they should be genderless. Like, it's not that they should be treated less than because they're women, but I don't think that it's healthy for us to pretend that they are genderless in all these other areas of their lives. Um, and that's where I worry about some of like the kind of like empowerment, like female empowerment stuff and that kind of stuff. I view that very much as like the mirror image of the men's rights, kind of like the rules of power and how to, you know, the pickup artists and that kind of stuff. I see that as like the mirror image of, or men going their own way or anything else like that, where it's like, it's not helpful. You're trying to separate, you're either trying to completely separate the gender so that they can't um, interact, or you're trying to pretend like there's no difference between them. Um, and it's hard to like live these dual lives where you're expected to behave in one way in all the other circumstances and not this way in other circumstances. And so I was just wondering, like, what's your thoughts on like like the roles of women outside of the husband wife relationship? Should that be truly genderless, or obviously it's not like a submission, you know, kind of relationship, but like how
Well,
does that play out?
yeah, I don't know. I feel like my perspective is a unique one, in that I work overseas in a culture where I'm like a third gender. Like, I'm not treated
Mm,
like a woman, a West African woman. I'm kind of a third gender, so that's what I know. But I mean, I don't like it. That's just the way things are. And also, you live in Seattle, right?
I do.
So you're kind of in like more of a hotbed of these type issues. Even when I'm in America, I'm in like Oklahoma, Arkansas, so a little less extreme
A lot less extreme. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
some of these ways. So some of the things you're saying, I'm not even exactly sure what you're referencing. I think I know, but I do agree. I was kind of, I guess I didn't mean to say that that's the ideal, that women are
No, but it is the reality
right.
of what a lot of women are taught and trying to act out. And I wonder if that's one reason why we find it so hard, is because that is the expectation. And so it seems like we're both genders are getting more miserable about the arrangement. It's not,
Yeah,
I don't think it's making either of us happy.
for sure.
Um, but I just did, but like, what would be the right way, like to talk about these things? Like, I work in engineering, and so like, is there a gendered engineer? Like, I mean, no, but kinda, right? Like, I mean, no, the engineer is not like, engineering profession is not like a gendered one, and women can do that as much as men, and whatever. But am I supposed to not treat the woman like a woman in the profession? Um, I don't know. Like, I'm told no by HR, but I don't know. Like,
Yeah,
is that the right thing?
right. Well, and I think about too, women who switch from a career to staying home with kids. It's such a total mindset switch, because you're trained to like, don't let that man get that promotion above you just because he's a man, and like make sure all your efforts are, commended by your boss, and that you're not a doormat because you're a woman. And then you go be a housewife where none of your efforts are commended by anyone unless your husband is super sensitive and great, which isn't always.
Right,
You're just folding laundry and like cleaning the house and like feeding
right.
children. Like, no one is giving you any positive feedback at all.
And honestly, I mean, even at work, like that attitude of I need to be obsessed with getting the promotion and getting the praise and all that kind of stuff is I think really damaging to people, because the fact is that, like, yeah, I come home and my, if your wife is doing laundry and that kind of stuff, it's kind of a thankless job, and you should be sensitive, and especially that she, like, words of affirmation, things like that are important to her. Like, you should do that for her. But the fact is that, like, when I'm at work, it's not like I'm being constantly pat on the back, right? It's not like everyone's just like, and I get in the house and it was like, thank you so much for making money for the mortgage this week and that kind of stuff. Like,
Right.
no one's doing that. Like, everyone feels unappreciated. Everyone feels this. So we should be sensitive to it, but I feel like women are also being made to feel as if they're uniquely singled out for this feeling of inadequacy. And that's not to invalidate how they're feeling. I don't mean that, and it can come across that way, and sometimes I do. That's not what I mean. I mean that, like, I think that they have this picture. I think some women at least have this picture that guys are constantly being like, that a boy, like, all the time, and you're like, that's not really my experience. I'm pretty much ignored just like most people. So like, and it'll make you miserable though if you think that if that's your expectation. um, then you're going to be miserable, and you're going to be miserable at your job, you're going to be miserable as a wife, you're going to be miserable as a husband, you're going to be miserable in a marriage, you're going to be miserable if you put those expectations on something. And that's why I think that the wrong expectations, to go back to something we were talking about earlier, the wrong expectations are being put on guys for what submission and being Christ-like to your wife looks like. And I think that we're trying to put the wrong expectations on women about what that looks like too. And the end result is everyone's going to be miserable.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be this way, but I mean, a certain amount of misery is to be expected, but not as much, maybe. Um, any other major topics that you wanted to chat about, or you think are relevant, or like experiences that you have? Like, how are things different in West Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I have like very unique chips on my shoulders, but I try to work through them. Yeah, I mean, West Africa is a polygamous society, so I mean,
That's it's really common, or
yeah, if
so,
you
like,
have,
yeah, I was gonna say, so, like, is it most family units are polygamous, or is it
if you
it's
have,
just like the rich men are
well,
polygamous?
rich, or you just have to prove that you can support the woman. So
Okay.
not necessarily rich, and in the villages, not rich at all, just more common. But so I have, yeah, I mean, a lot of my friends have 2 wives. 3 wives is less common. 4 wives is much less common. You have to be rich to have 4 wives.
Right.
Um,
All the
so
shoes, I'm sure.
that's right, all the shoes. Um, so I mean, this it's the reason that I did, kind of start thinking a lot more about gender roles and how, like, which ones are culturally bound, which ones are biblically mandated. And I still do have some problems with that. Like, as I mentioned, just being from the South, sometimes I feel like some of it is cultural bound, it's not biblically
It's
mandated.
funny to me that you say you're from the South. See, because I'm from North
I
Carolina
know, I know.
originally,
Uh,
like, I don't consider
no,
that
not
the South.
Oklahoma so much. Arkansas,
Yeah,
a little bit more.
it's closer. You're getting closer to the South. You're getting
Well,
closer to the
you're right.
homeland.
No, it's very subjective. It's on a spectrum.
No, I'm just joking.
To Southerners, it's not the South, but some of those cultural
Yeah.
things are still playing in. Um, so thinking about those things, um,
So about polygamy. So I was thinking about this a while ago. Since we're on this topic, like, why does like, obviously we have Genesis and the created order and the way things were going to be: one man, one woman. Okay, theologically makes sense. Um, Obviously was not unanimous. Like, it wasn't, you kind of unanimous that was the way that you were supposed to live, even in the Old Testament, right? Like, lots of the lots of people who were not like condemned as evil in the Old Testament had multiple wives and concubines and all this kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so, you get to the New Testament, and so, Paul's kind of, they're laying out the qualifications for elders, right? And it makes like one statement was needs to be the husband of one wife,
Mhm.
right? And that's always struck me as kind of weird, right? Why the husband of one wife? Like, why was that something to throw in there, really? Because otherwise it's talking about behavioral issues and that kind of stuff. And there's lots of other things they could have thrown in there, like not a
Right.
murderer and that kind of stuff. Why husband of one wife? Okay. Um, and I think it does get back to um, like if you have multiple wives um, or multiple spouses, like the your incentive to deal with um, your spouse's feelings and pay attention to them and sacrifice for them changes, right? If you have if I have four wives and one of them's not happy with me, I got three other ones. She'll get over it, right? And now she's competing for my attention. So then everything becomes about me, right? In a lot of ways, like it would be very easy for me to be like, she's wanting my attention and resources and whatever. And so like that can be the power dynamic between these two people is you are one of many wives. I am your only husband, kind of thing. Especially if you throw in laws and social customs and all that kind of stuff to kind of enforce it. And so, but like the husband of one wife has to like can't do that. It's not all about him, right? To now he's got to think about this other person and can't easily, at least, unless he's very callous, ignore what that is because I don't got another wife, right? And so if one of the things that I want is like affection and closeness with my wife, then I can't ignore it. And so it's like a sanctifying process of that, of forcing you to enter into that kind of a relationship, and that's where the submission and the Christ likeness really comes and becomes really important because that's the only way you get that kind of sanctification is actually sacrificing yourself on one end and the other person's sacrificing themselves on the other end. Once you enter into a multi-spouse relationship, then that dynamic just doesn't work, right? That dynamic can't exist there. And so it's not just that it's not how Adam and Eve were created, is that it's actually like not good for your soul and like means that you're not going to become a very mature Christian. So long as this is or not as mature, you're not like this method of sanctification is not going to be available to you in some way. I didn't know what you think about that because I've never been to a polygamous society, but that's just what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Did you read? We had like not you and I, but I had an exchange with Sam and some other people on Discord about this at one point. I was kind of.
No, I don't think it was on that one. Yeah.
So I have a friend who I really respect who, okay, I won't say he's like pro polygamy, but he looks at it in the same way that God views divorce in like
Okay.
the West. Like it is not inside God's will, but because of our hardened hearts, it happens.
Right. Okay.
So I've actually become a lot, I'm not gonna say like accepting of polygamy, but I'll say accepting of polygamy in the sense that our cultural expectations of what marriage is and what a husband is supposed to do for a wife, and what a wife is supposed to do for a husband are just different from the get-go. And so I live in an Islamic society, so they aren't following biblical mandates for marriage to begin with.
Right.
Like that's
Yeah.
not the foundation. So everything you just said, I agree with, but I'm just like, it's not.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that I'm not even saying that they're bad. Like people get divorced that aren't, we wouldn't say are bad people or whatever, but but you would say that someone that was like actively engaging in or actively pursuing divorce or gets divorced all the time or whatever, like you wouldn't want them to be an elder in the church because you're like
Yeah.
and so like with the polygamy thing, it's not that I agree. I think that a lot of times once you take the like biblical mandates out of it, people will fall into what's easiest, right? And what's easiest is often like has practical consequence, like is just like practical. So like some men have a lot of money and can afford a lot of wives, and like a lot of women like need someone, especially in these like poorer countries, they need someone to help support them, especially if they want kids. And so it's practical. It's a practical arrangement. And in the same way that like, it's easy and sometimes practical to get divorced. That it's not, I'm just saying it seems to me that like, that's one of the missing things. And that's why it was a qualification to be an elder, is because you are missing that element of your own sanctification. It is actually the submission and the it's that dynamic of proving that you can navigate the submission and self-sacrifice for your wife. That is a really important sanctifying aspect of being a Christian. And so, yeah.
I totally agree with that. And you articulated it really well. It's something I've thought about living in West Africa for a long time. Like, I really don't think there's nothing but the gospel that can like change at a very deep level the society. Like, the family is a microcosm of society. And when you have polygamous marriages, you set out, there's like jealousy and manipulation at every level, to where, you're always competing with the brother of your dad's wife.
Right.
That like competition at every level, jealousy between the wives at every level, and then that just works itself up, through the government, through the family life, through the schools. Like, it's just
I mean, even I think even like levels of like infanticide are way higher in polygamous societies as well, which makes sense. Like even from an evolutionary perspective, like people will drown other people's babies if you're competing with resources for yours.
This is a conversation that well, especially the men like to have with me a lot. Like, there's a lot of joking. I've been, I get proposed to on a fairly regular basis.
Has anyone offered you like a donkey or something?
Oh, well, I said my bride price is 100 cows.
Oh yeah, okay, 100 cows, yeah.
Brittany's like, one of these days, some rich guy is gonna take you up on that. That's my teammate. Sorry. So okay, we have this conversation pretty regularly, and it's like half in jest, half serious. Like, whichever way the wind is blowing. But I'm just like, we don't even have the same perception of what marriage is, and what a husband and wife relationship looks like. Right. Things are changing with globalization, but I mean, in general, like, your husband isn't someone that you actually really like enjoy being around or anything like that. That's not the expectation in getting married. So it's just so like,
so they're just like living kind of different lives a little bit, and they just have like it's a transactional relationship.
It's kind of and again, I'm making generalizations, and I live in a pretty traditional area, but it's like kind of just commonly accepted that you generally love your children more than your spouse. Your spouse is for children. So and there are exceptions, but in general, that's the case. So I mean, watching those marriage rites and those traditions has made me further think about my own upbringing, and again, what is cultural, what is biblical, what am I wrong about? I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, we have enough trouble here really understanding what we mean by submission and that kind of stuff. And then you throw in like a more global perspective, even like a global Christian perspective. I think that, outside of like the United States and maybe Western Europe, what it means for like submission and the relationship between the husband and wife, and some other areas like, I mean, I don't know, Ethiopia, will probably look very different than what we think it does, which is interesting. Which is, you do all, like, and so this is where like I'm sympathetic to the idea that we're being influenced by, we have to take culture into consideration and that kind of stuff whenever we read some of these verses. I get that. it just seems to me that the American culture is so individualistic and so just completely like disregarding of created order and that kind of stuff that it feels like we're erring on the wrong side of it broadly. But then within like a certain sect of the evangelical community, we're almost like reacting on the other side, like almost like just reactionary, and going so far opposite what everyone else is saying that we're like, well, we don't have to go to either of these places. I don't feel like.
Keep it in the middle of the road.
Yeah, just like, I mean, again, like I'll go back to what I said. If what you read Jesus's words are the Bible's words, if you read it and you're totally comfortable with what it's calling you to do, then you're not really reading the Bible. And so I feel like both sides is, yeah, it should be really uncomfortable for everyone. And what's that?
Change preachers.
Yeah, like change preachers, or just reflect on yourself. Like, to what extent is your own sin influencing what you're wanting this verse to say, or this book or this chapter or whatever? Because if it's not uncomfortable, then I don't like, why would it have stuck around? Why would it have meant so much? And this is one of the things that I did appreciate about Jordan Peterson's biblical series, is because he, not the greatest exegesis of the text and all that kind of stuff. However, what he did have a good point that I never thought about. It's like, why these stories? Why did these stories make it here to us, right? And it's because they're deeply meaningful. But if we just trivialize what it's saying and it's not uncomfortable or challenging or anything else, why keep it around, right? There's a lot of perfectly comfortable, encouraging, like whatever, like letters that I'm sure were written, and rabbis that wrote, and prophets who said things and that kind of stuff. They didn't make it to here. Why did these make it this far? And it's because they had something really relevant and eternal to say that's uncomfortable, and they should be uncomfortable. And so that's why I like to talk to, I mean, I tend to like just focus on the guy's perspective, and you're like, listen, you're the submission thing, you're probably getting wrong, but you really need to focus on this other side. That's the mirror image of what the woman is being called to. But I like talking to women about what submission is, because I know I feel like the women are getting how scary it is, and that's why it gets talked about so much. And I like that. I want everyone to be scared of this, because if you're not scared of it, then you're not doing.
Right. I think that's true. Well, and that's why, like, when I first joined Discord and I was listening to Jordan Peterson, I was like, he needs to talk to women too. Like, he's so smart. He's got so many good things to say to women. But now I'm just like, no, he can just keep talking to men, because it's just like what Jordan Peterson is like. Do you want to be married to a child or a man?
Right.
And like, there's not a woman alive who's like, I want to be married to a child. Like that doesn't make sense. So he can keep doing this thing.
Yeah. I mean, and the only thing that I do wish, and this is, now I'm going to be critical of the female side.
That's good. I feel like we've been a little lopsided here.
It's true. I do feel like the teachings, I don't feel like there's a Jordan Peterson version that I know of with women that I think isn't hugely damaging. Like the ones that I see, that like the women, like the teachings that I see being resonating with women are very much, they're not countercultural at all in the ways that Jordan Peterson is for men. And that really worries me. It's almost like it's feel good Oprah nonsense. That's not actually, it's basically trying to water down some of the things, like, and encourage, just be yourself, trust your intuition, like, be empowered, like you're strong and powerful and that kind of stuff. And like, if there's anything that I refuse to go to counseling for a long time in our marriage, and because I didn't think we needed it, and it felt like weak to me and that kind of stuff. But then when I started going, like I realized now it wasn't strong to not admit your weaknesses, right? And to not confront them. And I feel like that's what women are being encouraged to do, is not to admit the weakness and confront it. It's to deny that they have it and just constantly like whisper in their own ear how strong and powerful they are and how they can do anything and blah, blah, blah. And like, that's just a really kind of toxic, it's not a good message for people, because it kind of feeds on your own narcissism. It wouldn't be good for guys to hear that message. It wouldn't be good for girls to hear that message. And that's one of the things that I'm frustrated about. Like, I would love a Jordan Peterson-esque like version that goes to women and challenges them, as opposed to just gives them empty platitudes.
Yeah.
That and I can't. It makes me irritated whenever I hear it. So
Anamik and I talked about this. Jeff and I talked about this. And I'm a woman, and I still don't exactly know what that would look like.
I don't know either. It wouldn't look, obviously it wouldn't look like Jordan Peterson, right? It would be a different message,
Yeah.
and delivered differently and that kind of stuff. But it wouldn't. Yeah. So I don't know what that looks like at all. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think you can take clips of Jordan and feed them to women.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, you don't have to yell at women the conclusion, like their mind will lead them to where Jordan Peterson is going. So I think that could be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it is a little tricky.
Yeah. And some of it, like, and again, some of it I get, right? Some of it I get why we're going like very reactionary and kind of going overboard on the, women are smart and strong and powerful and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, I get it. Like that, because if you look at, 50, 100 years ago, whatever, like this was, it was very much the opposite of this, right? And even maybe more recently than even that. Okay, I get it. Like that's true. And so I get the reactionary nature of it, that you want to like affirm that that's not true and that wasn't right, and we shouldn't have been doing some of these things and saying some of these things, and that shouldn't have been the cultural attitude. I get it. But that's not to say that, it's not to say that you should indulge in kind of childish fantasies about like the angelic nature of one gender versus another. And that's what I feel like we're doing. Like, I feel like it's weird. I feel like we're infantilizing both genders in different ways. We're infantilizing men by not giving them challenges, right? Mm-hmm. And just, telling them to be, essentially Peter Pan. And we're infantilizing women by not telling them the truth. And that's horrible. Like people need to be treated like adults. Both genders do, and that'll look different. But we don't need to pretend that men don't need challenges and women need to be like patted on the head all the time, either. And just be like, yeah, good girl. Like, you can do anything. It's fine. You're like, are you 3? No, you can't be an astronaut. That's not going to be a thing. So, anyway, not that women can be astronauts. I'm talking about 3-year-old. So you just give that caveat. Okay.
Yeah.
This was fun. Yeah, we solved it. Don't worry about it. Yeah. This was fun. It's a topic that I think is really important for the church to get right. And I guess I'm frustrated because I don't know. It seems like it's something we gloss over, and I don't like. I have a strong antipathy toward glossing over things. So this was helpful. Thank you for joining me, Shelly, and bringing your perspective, and enjoy the South while you're there.
I'll try.
Okay.
No.
All right. I'll stop the recording now.